Hi, everyone. Welcome to episode 20 of the Live Your Jam podcast. I'm Ellen McGinnis, your host. And I want to start out and tell you why I invited today's guest on the show. I'm thrilled that he's decided to join us. But I think it says a lot about everything that I'm doing here at Live Your Jam. So I've been teaching people how to live from the inside out, to trust their intuition, to listen to their soul. And I believe in all of that deeply. But I also know that for a lot of people, especially those of us who've been raised to trust only what we can see and measure, that's kind of a big ask. So I found today's guest, Johnny Burke, who is the host of a podcast called The Closer to Venus online. And I have watched all of his episodes for the past 6 months. So I've been really enjoying his podcast. And he spent years interviewing people who have had direct, undeniable experiences with something beyond the physical world. For example, hospice mediums who sit with the dying and watch them reach for people in the afterlife that the rest of us can't see. People who are clinically dead and then come back and describing the same light, the same love, the same overwhelming sense of coming home. So we're going to talk about that and much more today. But what strikes me is that all of this external evidence that with the people that Johnny has on his podcast, none of it, while it looks outward, every single account points back to consciousness, to love, and that the idea that something greater is not only all around us, but within us. And so his show is about external evidence. And what I do is about the daily practice. And today I'm going to bring both of that together. So I'm so excited, everybody, to introduce you to Johnny Burke, the host of Closer to Venus podcast. Welcome, Johnny.
Thank you. You did a really good job of explaining anything. I don't think I have to talk at all.
I want to hear a lot from you, so I'm going to talk a lot less. But I appreciate you sitting there through the intro. So let's talk about Closer to Venus and your podcast. And so just to begin, what does Closer to Venus mean and how does that represent you?
It was the name of a synth pop band in Los Angeles about 2008. They were originally called Groove Project. They were some of my friends, and they had great, like Depeche Mode meets like a Panzer tank, like dance. Somebody actually made that description, came up with that description, and they were great. But I said, guys, you've got some great songs, but your name doesn't fit. It doesn't fit your music. The brand is not, it's not correct. I said, I've had this name for years and years. And so they took it up and they adopted it. It didn't last very long, but at least it looked and sounded better, made more sense. And
so you gave Closer to Venus the name for the band?
But that was back in 2008. And like I said, it didn't last very much longer than that. But since then, some people that are, I would say, have a pretty high intuition would say things like, well, it makes total sense because Venus is the goddess or was the goddess of love and Mars was the god of war. What is more important, war or love? And I thought, oh, I guess I kind of knew that all along, or I just plain got lucky. I knew I was going to use it for something. Was it going to be a magazine? I thought about maybe just interviewing musicians at one point, which is even before that. And I had the name. I don't remember where I got the name from, but I really liked it. I thought I'm going to use it for something. So when the podcast was started, I had to name it something. I thought, okay, Closer to Venus is cool. It's cosmic or whatever. And the idea, the foundation was to find the answers, the big questions, like why are we here? How do we get here? What's the purpose? What really happens when we die and things like that. I wasn't really worried about naming it the Reincarnation Podcast or something like that. That didn't really make a whole lot of sense.
Yeah, I love the Closer to Love. I mean, that's wonderful. And when you started this, because you're at like 250 episodes in now, Live Your Jam's just a wee baby. You're my 20th episode. So what was the beginning? Like, take us there. Were you always curious about answering these questions and wanted to kind of discover them?
Yeah, always. I grew up in a Catholic household, like many people in New Jersey, and the church didn't really quite give me all the answers that I wanted, especially when I started to learn about reincarnation, or at least hear people talking about it. at an early age, and I would ask the nun. One of my art teachers were nuns at one point, and I remember asking this one sister, and she just would not even talk about it. She goes, "You young man, that's not appropriate for someone your age," and she just dismissed it. Yeah, dismissed it completely. I thought, okay, so there must be something here. And then I would ask my parents about it, and nobody really wanted to talk about it, you know?
Yeah. No, I have similar, raised Catholic, and I felt like a lot of the answers were insufficient, and all the things I was interested in, nobody wanted to talk about. So I can really relate to that.
Same thing.
Yeah. So the three foundational questions you're trying to answer on the podcast, you kind of mentioned them, but let's just walk the listeners through them.
Why are we here? What are we supposed to be doing? And we're not all supposed to be doing the same thing. And what really happens when we die? Where do we go? And it's not just in the ground. I never believed that, even as a kid. That made no sense. Even as a child, some people would say, oh, we're going to go to heaven if we're good. And if we're not, we're going to hell. I thought, well, that's BS. That's not correct. And some people, the other half would say, oh, when you're dead, you're dead. I thought, well, they're both kind of stupid. But I was a snarky kid when I was young. But it really made me want to learn more, and eventually I did. I started learning about near-death experiences. That was a big deal. And the data, I mean, in 1994, there was at least 900,000 documented cases. And that was, a long time ago. And I don't think that many people are making that up, do you?
No, and it's across culture, and we're going to talk about NDEs, because I think near-death experiences, NDEs, were kind of my scientific kind of aha, and they were kind of my gateway drug into really understanding, or at least I had this belief that there's more, and it kind of validated that scientifically, and so that gave me maybe the confidence to pursue it. So it's interesting that we had similar interests as youngins. So your show, you have guests that talk about near-death experiences, past lives, even extraterrestrial contact, angels, the Akashic records, reincarnation, and also lives between lives, So for humans and their souls having a human experience, what happens when where does the soul go when we're not here? Because we're only here for a brief bit. But so these aren't your normal everyday things, which is why I love your podcast. And yes, great questions. So what is the criteria for someone who gets to be a guest on the Closer to Venus podcast?
They have to be an experiencer, primary researcher, or some kind of practitioner. An experiencer would be someone who had a near-death experience, or a medium, or someone who has past life memories. A practitioner could be a shaman. A shaman's kind of an experiencer as well, but let's say a past life regression hypnotist. Sometimes they're also experiencers, and sometimes they're not. Or a primary researcher would be someone like Ian Stevenson. Someone comes to him and says, hey, I have a past life memory of this guy's named Johnny Burke. He lived in Trent, New Jersey. It's 50 years from now. Yeah, he's kind of a jerk. I'm like, okay, little man, let's go back and find Johnny's his family, and then we're gonna share what you know about them. And he did this with like 1,500 cases. I mean, what more do you need?
So let's talk about that. I want to get into the specifics. We're going to talk about mediums and some hospice mediums, and then ETs and stuff like that. But you've done now close to 250 episodes. After all of these episodes, let's just start big, and then we're going to narrow it down. What's one thing that nearly every guest, maybe potentially across every tradition, seems to agree on?
That we are eternal souls. That, again, we don't just go on the ground. Consciousness does survive. And if you need for those people that need what we call proof, whatever that means, how do you explain someone who flatlines and can remember the whole thing from above and looking down at everybody?
We'll talk about some of the research out there, University of Virginia, I think it's University of Arizona. There's lots, but I want to talk about that. So what has gotten more mysterious over time for you, not less? I mean, I find it just to comment again on your last answer, I find it very comforting, and it also just resonates with me. I call it soul resonance, when there's something that you absolutely believe to be true and you don't really, I know I researched it and knew why. Now I kind of have the evidence, so I find that reassuring. But for you, what has gotten more mysterious over time? not less.
The ET world, because the more I learn about it, the more that's that much more to learn. There's friendly ones, not so friendly ones. It seems like most are friendly, at least with the people that I've interviewed, and they could be helpful. But, there's government theories and things like that we're not going to get into tonight. But at this point, it's really discernment on my part on what I want to dive into and what I don't. But I do want to learn. If I've gotten this far, I want to at least know, is this factual? Is it probable? Or is it just really a fantasy? And that's gonna be a pretty big ask, put it that way.
Yeah. And you're exploring that more. I mean, do you feel like we'll talk about it, but you explored mediumship, maybe not to the nth degree, but you feel pretty comfortable there, and you might be moving into the field more of exploring ETs. Does it work like that for you? No, I'm pretty comfortable here in terms of my knowledge and these questions being answered. Now I'm going to move over into this other kind of topic.
Not necessarily, because they all work together, because NDEs, near-death experiences, can be very revealing. And I'll give you an example of that later.
Love one, yeah. Oh, okay.
Well, there's actually quite a few, but I know of two that I'd like to at least mention briefly. The mediumship is critical because, and once we talk about the two girls that I knew that worked in hospice, that's as important as anything. So it never really, I have to rely on certain types of experiencers and researchers to get answers, because I am not an experiencer. I'm not a medium. I'm not a seer or anything like that. But the mediums those people that have that experience, that have that skill, can tell us a lot about the ET world because of the channeling and the communication.
Yeah. Yep. Good. Fair point. Yeah. That it kind of all bleeds into one another. It just further distills kind of how complex it's not just a human experience. Okay. Right. So the final big kind of meta question for you here is, before we get into kind of the specifics, is what is the most uncomfortable truth you have learned during these conversations? Learning about soul contracts, because when we go through the birth, school, work, death, in between space and come back, what it seems like and what I've been told, that whole process in the in-between space is like casting a movie, or like a theater group assigning roles, based on things that is for the good of the group, the soul group. And sometimes it's not a pleasant thing. It could be a young person who dies early, or someone who's crippled or with some kind of impediment, and it's not always fun, but again, it's for the good of the group. I would never, ever volunteer that information in a casual conversation, because I know it's going to make people upset, but that's what I'm told. Yeah. When I first got into this work, one of the biggest hangups was, in my terms of helping other people, was if somebody, my example would be losing a child early, right? Like, how do I even talk about that in a way that could be comforting? And I can't. It just seemed very difficult to tackle. So, I mean, what you're saying is that, their near-death experiences, they've kind of proven, so that we come in, we contract in, that we take our parents at the life that we choose, the lessons that we choose, the way we're going to come in, the way we're going to come out. And we can choose to end that, earlier in certain cases. Exit points too. Yeah. That's, I've heard that at least a dozen times. And I think, so I choose how I'm going to leave. And apparently an angel can come in and make sure that you're ready. But there's several, but at some point you have to take one. Right. That's what I'm told. And then in the case that you're talking about is that it's difficult that when people, leave early and it's painful for others. And the harsh lesson is that it's all for the better good, and that was contracted in. And I think we'll get into the mediumship, but people who in near-death experiences, but people who have crossed over from the human life and go across the veil or to the other side, whatever euphemism you want to use, those people are all fine. Every time they are connected with, they're happy and they're in a great place, 99% of the time. So I think that provides solace for people, but it is difficult for people to get around. It is. The near-death experience is more often than not, like you say, it does provide some comfort, and plenty of times
This is a recent episode where this one woman was given a chance to stay or go back. And it's pretty heavy stuff. Obviously, she came back, but, there's some interesting effects of near-death experiences as well. Often their psychic or intuition levels really just jump up quite a bit. There's a lot to learn there, but it's usually, there are dark NDEs, but it's usually a good experience. They learn from it.
Yeah. Let's jump into medium, and then we can talk a little bit more on the other subjects. But I just kind of want to personally land on this and ground it for everybody before we get into it. So there are a lot of mediums out there today, and some people are arguing that because our consciousness is raised and it's a skill that everybody has, and people are actually now starting to develop it. But my experience is the range of the skill level with mediums is enormous, and personally, I'm most comfortable with what are called evidential mediums. These are mediums who they don't deliver vague impressions or general feelings. They provide specific, verifiable information and details that could not have been known. And many of them have been validated. So the research is compelling. It's not anecdotal. The institutions like the Windbridge Research Center in Arizona, University of Virginia, I mentioned, have been testing mediums under controlled and double-blind laboratory conditions for decades. Science is finally taking this seriously, right? It is.
Isn't it?
Yes. Yeah. I think near-death experiences probably preceded the mediumship piece. And the government, we'll talk about that, has been dealing with this for a long time. So with everything that you've seen on your show, what separates you from mediums who kind of convince you, and maybe potentially those where you have your doubts? Or do you find yourself, like I do, gravitating towards evidential ones? What's your bias and what have you learned?
Definitely evidential. It's a good point. I'm probably going to get a lot of flack for this, but I think mediums are kind of like acting teachers. There's a lot of them, but not everyone should be practicing. You mentioned Windbridge. I know I interviewed two people from the Forever Family Foundation, and they test mediums and certify them. And long story made short, only about 15% get certified. So every single medium says anyone can do this, but you have to do the work. You have to train. You can't just take one class and then, open up a business. But yeah, so it's true. Does it work? Yes. Have I seen the evidential piece? No question. And I'm not there to judge anyone, but there are people that, and this is tough for me because sometimes I have to turn people down when they have to contact us.
Yeah.
If I don't think their skills are really quite there, or if they say something which I know is a dead giveaway, I'm thinking, this isn't good. But some of them shouldn't either not be practicing or they should work at it a little bit harder. In all fairness, that's how I see it.
Yeah, good. No, it's good to know your discernment and your process in it. So, because I had to kind of figure that out for myself too. And there's just some people out there that we're going to gravitate towards what we gravitate towards. So the evidential seems to give me some sort of comfort. But I want to talk to you about, we had a great conversation in our kind of discussion about hospice mediums, because I think you were wonderful when we first talked. You're like, this can provide people a lot of comfort. And I agree. So you've had hospice mediums on your show. They're people who sit with the dying. And you want to just explain a little bit about what they do and what commonalities you notice and what they report, and what are they witnessing, that some of us aren't when we're sitting with people, our loved ones who are passing.
Well, and this is a pretty common occurrence when someone is about to pass. They're talking to someone who's a relative or a friend that passed 20, 30 years ago. And the immediate assumption is, it's the medication or they're delirious. Those people on the other side are basically the welcoming party. And what I liked about the mediums, they just happen to be mediums. They didn't really advertise that, but they can sense this before we do. And long story made short, they can literally sense or sometimes see the welcoming party that's going to make the transition easier. And if a person has had maybe hundreds or maybe even thousands of past lives, sometimes they don't even need the welcoming committee because they've done it so many times, but some people do. So when you hear about one of your relatives or friends that's about to pass and they were in hospice or whatever, they're not making it up. At least that's what I'm told.
We had the conversation that my mom passed, and she was 97, and I was with her, but in April. And 2 days before she passed, she was talking about being at dinner with my father, who had already passed. He died, 15 years ago. And then the day that she passed, she was talking to her mom. She thought somebody was her mother, and then she thought there were kids in the room the night before. And in the hospice setting, we didn't have a hospice medium there, but it's called she's starting to hallucinate. That's what was being said. I'm not getting, she had wonderful care and they're lovely. But the truth is that was probably her welcoming party. My mother had lost two children. She was already having dinner the night before. She told me with my father, who had been passed. And then when one of her favorite caretakers came in, she said, "Mom." And those were her last words. So that's a good example of us kind of looking at something and saying, oh, the person's hallucinating, but really they probably are meeting their welcoming committee, right?
Which is pretty cool when you think about it. And
very cool.
Maybe it won't soften the blow that much, maybe by 1 or 2%, but as time goes on and you get a chance to get past it, you start to think, oh yeah, maybe I was actually right. Because when you hear it from your friends or your family or anyone else, you start to think, yeah, we had a similar experience too. It's very, just like you say. And it does give you comfort, And when the dreams, that's a whole nother area, but they do come to us in dreams too. I mean, some things might be made up, but, and again, this is where the mediums are very, very important. They can confirm some things and give us, and because they have an extra set of glasses or specs, as I say, that we don't. So good to know.
Yeah, it is good to know. So let's talk about near-death experiences. And, because I know that's a topic that you like, but you really are interested in the in-between, like what happens in between the lifetimes. I've been reading about near-death experiences, for a long time. I talked about University of Virginia. There's Dr. Bruce Grayson. He studied them for decades, and the research is just so cool. But you're also drawn to what happens in between lifetimes. So just tell me about that and where your curiosity is. What is the in-between life, and why does it fascinate you?
Well, the in-between space, life between lives, that comes up a lot when I interview either someone who has past life memories and or a past life regressionist or a past life regression hypnotherapist, because often when they go into a past life, if they need to, they don't always do that, but when they do, they often go through the death scene, and after the death scene, they go into the in-between space. That's where just about everybody says it's like casting a movie, and it's under hypnosis. I mean, there's been volumes written about it. Dr. Michael Newton, he wrote 2 books on it, which really reads like a sci-fi book, but there's 7,000 plus cases just from his work that support that. And everybody I talk to that has those memories all say the same things. Of course, it's not the same as an NDE. With an NDE, sometimes they can go into, depending how far they go, into a past life, but it's not as common. But with past life work, there's now even a certification for that, which is called life between lives regression, or sometimes future life progression. So there's a bunch of different things that one session might spill into the in-between space, and sometimes they can go forward and look at timelines.
My understanding is that many of these people, when they are in the in-between and they can access that, they can talk about things that happened centuries ago, like that they wouldn't have any knowledge or information on. Have you ever had any knowledge or information about, right, unless they were studying it or a historian? Have you had guests on that have explained that kind of phenomenon to you?
Oh, yeah. I've had guests that remember things as far back as Atlantis or Lemuria. I had one speaker tell me about how on Lemuria, before they were attacked by the reptilians, they lived, in harmony with other ET races. This is, I don't know how many thousands of years ago, but some people remember Atlantis. They remember right before the flood. They remember going to Egypt. They remember things like telepathy and psychic activity was completely normal, which goes back to what we keep hearing today is we're trying to remember who we were. And my hunch is that we're trying to remember how powerful we were thousands of years ago. And yeah, they do. And some people remember times and periods even before recorded history. So yeah, it goes, yeah. Or being light beings or galactic past lives. That's coming up a lot these days too.
Yeah.
And they make it sound like it's a memory of, visiting Italy or France. It's not that big of a deal.
Yeah. I've heard that we come in groups. Like if you come in with your group of maybe your soul group, yeah, and your star seeds or whatever they are, people come in together. And you talked about that in the kind of the life contract piece around what's hard lesson is that we choose this, right? And so what can you share with our listeners about that thinking around that we come in with the soul group?
The soul group is apparently, with the soul family, is apparently a group that originates, I guess, somewhere in the in-between space that we've had past lives with for maybe eons until we learn our lessons and, fix the karma. But we're always apparently connected to them. But many people do remember having past lives with people they recognize today and going back maybe 300 years or even farther than that. And now, obviously, I've never been there personally, but when you hear the same thing over and over again, you start to think, well, I think I got something here.
Yeah.
So I hear that a lot.
Now, who is telling you this? Is it mediums or is it past life regressionist experts, people about
No, it's the experiencer that has past life memories. Yeah. It could be a medium. It could be an intuitive, because lots of people don't like using the title medium because it brings up unpleasant things. So they'd rather, or they have that ability, but they don't actually give readings, but they can communicate with the dead. They would just rather not advertise it.
Does the in-between suggest that we choose our lives still? Does it reinforce when you're talking to those experiencers, our lessons, our families, and our challenges? Because that's what the NDE experience says as well. So do the people who've had experiences with the in-between kind of validate that?
Definitely. It's like casting a movie. Good people, the bad people, and, what you're trying to learn. And then, of course, when you come down here, you forget all about it. And then you spend your life trying to figure out what your purpose is. But I'll tell you this is one of my favorite quotes. It's from the Long Island Medium. And I was telling one of my speakers about this. And we're talking about the life between lives space, which he had experience in. I said, what Teresa Caputo says is, life is like an episode of Saturday Night Live. Everybody wears different costumes, gets into different characters, but at the end of the night, everyone hugs. And then the woman says yes. And then they go down to the bar and they celebrate their performance.
Yeah, it is. It is. No, that's a great example. I also think when you look at it that way, it makes it, a lot of people say, a lot of spiritual teachers say that we're here to get rid of fear. That's one of the common lessons for most of us. I don't know if I think that's a big part of our time here, is to enjoy it and to know that we can't really make any mistakes. Although that's hard in the human form, right? Because we can do things that can harm us. I like the idea of the Teresa Caputo example because it makes it seem like it's just okay.
It's a role. It's like you agreed to play this role because you want to strengthen your skills, you want to learn more, and you want to do it for the good of the group.
Let's just explain to our listeners about near-death experience, what it has taught us in terms of that we're not in human form. We're a soul that has had many experiences, right? And that, my understanding is, our soul there's different personalities within our soul. If we look at it at a big level, like Ellen McGinnis that lives in this time frame is one part of that. And then there's the different aspects and my different personalities. It's almost like it's broken up into little compartments, but it all makes a whole. Do you agree with that in terms of what the soul's kind of...
I'm not an expert on any of this. I'm just the court reporter type guy. I'm just I'm taking the testimony. But from what I've heard and what I'm told is that more often than not, these people experience complete unconditional love, great feeling. They see colors that don't exist here on Earth. Some people report seeing God or Jesus or Buddha, or sometimes they do see their friends or family that have passed on, and they're almost always in their best form, like at the height, even though they might have been in really bad shape when they passed. And there's been a couple dark NDEs, that they're not common, but they do happen. But they once they get back here, they are changed. It has an impact on them. They have more of a purpose. Sometimes they will often just completely leave their religion because like one woman I know in particular, she had an NDE and she had a what do you call it, head-on collision, and she was previously a born-again Christian. And when she finally figured out during the experience, like, this is it, I'm 26, I'm going to die. And she was really afraid because she thought that God was going to punish her. And her experience was nothing like that. And that it's a revelation for them. And I mentioned before, they also often have heightened intuition and psychic activity and things like that as well. It's life-changing.
Yeah.
It is.
Yeah. In those kind of ways, I think the unconditional love and all the beauty that they feel can kind of release some of the fear that we have here being in these kind of in human form, right? That we're going to get something wrong, we're going to do wrong, or that we are mistakes, right? And then we hold shame for that. So one of the things that I try to help people with is in order to listen to your intuition, we've really got to kind of still have to work on ourselves. I think it's our soul. Like when you say we come in, we forget, we make this contract, we come into the world, and then when we get here, we have this act. That's where free will is born from. It's from the loss of remembering of why we're here. And then we're kind of sorting it all out while we get here. And I think that I find for some people, they're still pretty sensitive and they're empaths. But for a lot of us, as we mature, our ego starts to calm down a little bit, and then we can kind of hear the urgings of our soul. Do you agree with that in terms of one line of thinking, or what has been your experience with intuition?
Well, for one, intuition is, you have to be really specific, I think. I don't really talking about intuition in a general sense. I'll typically ask the kind of questions like, what are you trying to accomplish? In other words, are you a shaman? Are you a medium? Or what's your line of work? Because I've seen some examples of people that will talk about intuition in a very surface fashion, which does nothing for me. Can't speak for everybody, but I think when we talk about intuition, a lot of it goes back to what I said before about what I'm hearing more and more every day is we have to raise our vibration. We hear this a lot. We talk about ascension and where we're trying to get as a race, not just as a country. And if we can raise our vibration enough, we can get to what we call 5D, which is more about cooperation rather than competition. And you can't do that unless you open up your intuition. Does that make sense?
I say that's the larger game of Live Your Jam, is that I think intuition is probably the gateway to listening to our higher self. That is some pathway. I think it's very difficult to define as well. But there's this unknown about it. And when you're in that unknown, this stuff happens that is unexplainable sometimes but it's a knowing as well. And I think when we're operating from that place and we're really kind of operating from our highest good, that raises the collective. And as we all raise the collective, vibration gets higher and we're closer then to this kind of love thing. That's kind of my kind of hamstringed approach to it all. But I've just had enough experiences meditating and having things that I'm calling my intuition happen and I'm not a psychic, I'm not a medium either, but really nice things happen where I know that I'm connected to something else.
Some people would call it the love frequency, or as a very recent guest called it, the love and above frequency. So, yeah, and she's a very wicked smart woman. Yeah, very interesting. So, yeah, I think that's the thing I hear the most, raising the frequency. Yeah. And there's multiple reasons for it, but if you understand how the conversation about 3D to 5D and moving out of the ego and into more of a unity type consciousness, then it starts to make sense.
It does. Mm-hmm. All right, let's talk about fun things. Let's talk about ETs, contact and consciousness. So I want to just be upfront with our listeners. ET experiences are not an area of deep study for me. It's not where I spend a lot of my time. But I do believe quite simply that it would be extraordinary hubris to think that we're alone in this universe. It's so vast. And so
100%.
I've always been like, of course there's other things out there. I mean, but I haven't gone deep into the research, but I believe it. Most recently in 2023, there was an intelligence officer named David Grush, who's 14 years of service at the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, testified before Congress under oath that the Pentagon had a UAP, which is unidentified aerial. What's the P stand for? I can't remember.
Unidentified aerial phenomena, I believe.
Phenomenon retrieval.
Yeah.
Thank you. Retrieval program, and that was kept secret from public and Congress. And just Barack Obama, former President Obama, just came out saying, "Yeah, we all know this is true." Recently, and was trying to walk it back and couldn't walk it back.
What else can he say, right?
Yes,
What else can
exactly.
yeah, I would
So
say the
you've
same thing.
interviewed people who've had ET experiences. What are the recurring themes across those accounts?
By the way, full disclosure, I've never seen one myself.
Yeah.
They don't contact me. They don't, not yet anyway. But from what I'm told, most are friendly. Most want to help us. I think some really look at us as a precious race because we have emotions and many ET races do not, because they're basically, work on just total logic. They're a lot more advanced than us. And from what I'm sure you've heard the same thing, apparently they're gonna make themselves known very soon, like this year or next year. If I had, again, and this is based on my hunch and what people told me, I think they've been here from the beginning.
Yeah.
They just apparently have ways to cloak themselves so you don't really notice it right away, or they have mechanism which can distract us, so we think we're looking at a human, but we're not. But I don't think, for the most part, there's a big fear about it. There's not going to be an alien invasion. I also don't think there's going to be a ship coming down from Venus, although that would be cool. That's going to come. That's going to have a welcoming party and have these 7-foot beautiful Amazonian type creatures coming out of the ship. Although that would be kind of fun to see. Mm-hmm. But I think they're going to, that's what I'm being told over and over again. Will it happen? I just want to get it over with. Come on already. Come on out. You don't have to show up on the White House lawn, but yeah, that's what I'm being told.
Yeah. Okay, cool. I agree with you. I kind of believe they're already here. I can't really prove it. If you want to talk about Atlantis, or that makes sense to me that they're probably in the ocean somewhere deep in the sea. I just kind of take this attitude of what if, and it's too much energy to disprove it. So I let the scientists kind of continue to figure that out and bring it more into the mainstream so we can understand it more. But do you, in your opinion, have you seen where ET experiences and potentially like near-death experiences, or probably the life in between lives, I would imagine, point to the same thing? Are there some commonalities there?
Sometimes, yes, because in the past lives, again, many of them are galactic lives. Sometimes you have to really pull it out of these people. Okay, is there anything else you're not telling me? Because when I first started doing this a couple of years ago, when I first started to dive into the galactic lives, some people were a little hesitant, but lately not so much. And they'll talk about lives on Sirius or Pleiades or even planets that we don't even have names for. So that's where that comes up a lot. And the one thing that probably the ET experience, the out-of-body or the near-death experiences, or even the past lives have in common is, in some instances, time is not linear like it is here. It doesn't exist.
There are some concepts that are just hard for the human mind still. Even I think when we talk about vibrations, we all go to higher, and quantum physics would say it's not necessarily higher, it's just out there on a different plane, right? It's probably more lateral than it is, higher.
I think that, again, I'm not a scientist, but I think trying to explain it in terms of quantum physics makes it even harder to explain and comprehend. I think there's certain things like consciousness. Can you measure consciousness? Not in 2026 you can. Maybe later on, but I just think that makes it harder to understand. I mean, I don't get it. I've been told that there really are no past lives because they're all happening at once.
At the same time, yeah. No. Quantum physics has some insights, But I will be honest, I've had to read and watch and listen repeatedly around some of the concepts around in quantum physics before I can even grasp just a little bit of it. But it does help with the simultaneous aspect of all of this. But I just want to acknowledge for all of our listeners, like, a lot of this stuff is kind of mind-blowing, because if you have a belief of X, Y, or Z, like, most people in the United States believe that death is the worst thing ever. And this view, what you
this
talking,
you.
this, yeah.
Okay.
This view, I'm saying, is that death is not the worst thing ever. It's a great thing.
Since you brought it up, one girl that I had on the show recently said, death is much more easier than birth. Birth is harrowing. Once death is more like a release. And apparently they leave the body before an event that could be painful and, chaotic. But it's like being released, because when you think about the near-death experience, they are released at least temporarily. When someone tells you that they're floating above the operating table and they're watching themselves flatline, and I had a woman that actually experienced this. She said the feeling was just amazing. She could hear what people are saying. She even floated to the next room, and this isn't the only account of that. But this happened in 1987, and during what was supposed to be a routine procedure that went south. And years later, she went back to the same hospital, and the doctor said, you had a near-death experience. We couldn't tell it. Back then, we couldn't really say that out loud, but now we can.
Yeah, lots of examples of people watching themselves and not being harmed. So to your point, yeah, and to that woman's point that you referenced, on the way out would be easier than on the way in, potentially. I mean, I don't know, having given birth, it's kind of harrowing getting a baby out. I mean, it's beautiful.
I can only imagine.
The outcome is beautiful, but the process, they're not, it just depends. But so let's talk about, you and I talked about this, about expanding the materialist mind. You just talked about consciousness and how we still can't prove it in today's day and age. There's many signs that point to it, but we still can't. And in the materialist mind, consciousness is kind of subservient to science and physics. And so I want to define the term of materialism before Johnny and I speak about it, everybody, because I think it's important for where this conversation is going. I'm not talking materialism, I'm not talking about, shopping. Or loving or loving nice things. But it is
going to Rodeo Drive, right?
Exactly, exactly. It's a scientific worldview that says if it can't be measured, tested, or proven through physical matter, it just doesn't exist. Full stop.
Yeah, that's not correct. One of the examples I just gave you kind of blows that right out of the water, because the materialist, or the strictly, I guess, in the empirical world where you have to measure everything, consciousness apparently is produced by the brain. When someone flatlines, there is no brain activity. When they're floating up above the operating table, and for some reason they always seem to float to the other room, in the waiting room or something like that, there's no way to explain that. And the rebuttal is usually, oh, but they imagined it. No, there's no brain waves. If there's no brain waves, there is no activity. They're dead, right? Which means, the consciousness is, what would you call that? Non-local. It's not dependent on the brain. And look, I'm no scientist, but I mean, if I had to bet my money, I'm betting that consciousness is not produced by the brain. If it were, those experiences would not exist.
Absolutely. And that is sort of the dominant thinking today in mainstream Western science, that this whole stuff that Johnny and I are talking about, life after death, is wishful thinking. The unseen world that we've been talking about in this whole conversation, and the unseen world that I think intuition is trying to lead us to, or trying to connect us to, is delusional. Obviously Johnny and I don't believe that, but here's the problem. Everything that we've been talking today about NDEs, mediums, the in-between, ET experiences, none of this fits inside that box. So, the point for me isn't to tear science down. I'm not a scientist, and I don't even really speak science, but I do want to expand people's ideas, because I think what is at stake is enormous. That So I want to talk to you about that because I know you and I really connect on that. We may spend our whole lives waiting for permission for something from the outside world to believe in something that our soul already knows. That statement for me is so resonant. I just choose to believe what my soul already knows and follow that. And I'm trying to help people do the same. So, what does cracking this open mean to you right now in your podcast? What's the entry point for you in all of this?
Well, I wouldn't say I'm a true skeptic. I'm a curious skeptic. But when I see the data, or when someone tries to, let's say I'm at dinner, and I usually discourage these kind of conversations unless I know everybody at the table because I've got too many moments of, oh, prove it. And, I feel like saying, well, maybe get off your fat butt and do some research. I mean, there's been research into these things for 50 years.
Right.
Take some time off from your golf game and look, because that's not my job or your job to convince those people that are doing this kind of thing. Right? There's a lot at stake, like you said, because, again, to get to that next level, which many people think that our civilization was there, maybe 10, 20,000 years ago, we can get to another level where we're not competing against each other, but we're cooperating, right? 3D versus 5D, moving into the inquiring age, ascension, whatever you want to call it, it's all pointing to the same thing. But if someone is saying something like, I know what I know, I see what I see, don't confuse me with the facts, there's nothing I can do there,
Yeah.
And that's where they are anyway. And it's not really my job or your job to really convince them otherwise. You can lead them to the water, but, it's a tired cliche. You can't make them drink, can you?
Right. Well, I think that the work that you're doing, though, and the people that you're bringing on your podcast is very impactful because you've even expanded my mind on some things. I've done some research on some things. So I think it's important work. And I would just say to people, just have an open mind about it and to be curious, to your point. I like the what if. So what's something crazy that you've heard that you're like, I'm still not buying that? Is there anything out there? I mean, are you just always curious?
Jesus. How much time do you have? Since you brought it up, one of the theories that is pretty out there, but I've heard probably about a dozen times at least, there's two types of ETs in this example. There's the friendly kind and the not so friendly kind. The not so friendly kind, the malevolent ETs, like the Draco reptilians, are trying to keep us in this 3D box like we're in right now,
right?
So they can feed off our energy. We're food to them.
Okay.
The benevolent ETs are trying to break us out, and the long story short, is that we have to raise, again, the love vibration to the point where those malevolent ETs can no longer exist in, and they have to leave. Okay. And again, I've been hearing raise your vibration, and so on from day one, for the past 6 years. And at first I thought, that sounds a little woo-woo, but now that I connect the dots in all the different disciplines or areas, I'm thinking, okay, I've heard this enough where I think they might have something. It's still a little out there, though.
Yeah.
ETs in the government and so on, which, again, I hear that every day. But unless I actually see it for myself, I'm not going to bet that's happening, but I'm not going to bet that it's not.
Yeah.
I'm going to just be in the middle.
No, it's good to hear kind of what's out there. I mean, if the outcome of that is raise your vibration, and for listeners, raising your vibration, there's lots of things you can do, very simple daily practices, which I talk a lot about in Live Your Jam. One is being out in nature, meditating, being around people that are kind and loving, trying to heal any traumas that you have and help yourself, kind of guide yourself and out of suffering, daily acts of kindness. So hanging out with animals, lovely animals. Any other ones, Johnny? Like, how do you try to raise your vibration?
I really don't know, other than meditation and, mantras and stuff like that. I'm kind of guarded when it comes to that. I don't really talk about it in my personal life, but I have to acknowledge that there is a divine order. There are angels. I call them guides. And I'll talk to them like they're buddies. Seriously? I mean, this is the best you can do? Come on, trying to do something cool here. Or I'll just have a funny moment. I'll say, please make me look cool, please. You know where I got that from, right? No, it's a movie with, what is that called? Almost Famous. Jason Lee.
Yes.
And
Great.
Can you imagine him talking to his guides? That's pretty much what he would do. But I have to, because every experiencer will tell me every one of us has a spirit guide, like it or not. Sometimes you have more than one, and there's angels everywhere. So I'm gonna make a bet that they're there. Hopefully, I don't talk to them in public, of course, but I think that's part of raising your vibration. I
agree.
Right?
I think it's acts of also communing with the spirit world in any way, even if it's talking to somebody who's passed, it's sort of, and everybody says the access through the heart. So I agree with you. And I have a fun you kind of have a fun sense of humor. So having that with your spirit guide would be the way you would go about it. And so I don't think we're supposed to take a lot of this seriously anyway.
No, and I'm glad you brought that up. That reminds me of that, because I would ask a lot of questions when someone brings up this or that, in this case, spirit guides. And I started to learn not that long ago that they can have a sense of humor. They can be kind of snarky, which I think is kind of cool. Well, when we talk about spirit guides, when I first started to learn about them and, talk to my speakers, some would say they even have a sense of humor. Some are even snarky. And I thought that would be really kind of funny if spirit guides or even guardian angels would look down and one would say, oh, no, not this idiot again. Let's say it's guardians like Michael and Raphael. Hey, Mikey, do you want to take this one this time? No, dude, it's your time. It's your turn. I'm not dealing with this guy again. And
it's Johnny again.
Yeah, that's idiot. And the angels or guides would try to bribe the other angel or guide with tickets to go see Bowie. And they said, look, I've already seen Bowie this week. I'm going to see him next week. I think that kind of makes it fun. When people listen to episodes, because you're right, you do have to have a sense of humor about it. I'll give you, and here's one this is a real experience, which I don't normally talk about a whole lot, but one of my brother Bruce, passed, it'll be 4 years in December, from cancer. And one of the last things I told him was, instead of, crying like everybody else was and everything, I just said, we'll be drinking beer again. Because my ritual, whenever I used to visit, I drive up from LA. We go to the corner store where he lived in Santa Barbara. I get some mail, and we talk about politics and all the stuff we don't agree on. And so I had a dream about him one night, and we're at a party, and he's looking in the refrigerator, and he looks up and he goes, Johnny, we're out of beer. And I said, okay, I'll go out and get some. And I'm thinking, I woke up the next day, I said, what are the odds? And naturally, I had, a discovery call with another medium, and I told her about it because that's the real thing. But at least there was some humor about it, right?
Yeah. I like to have humor too with it. It makes it seem like they're sidekicks with me, having a good time.
Hopefully.
Yeah.
And apparently they laugh and they make jokes all the time. And
I
mean, I've not had the experience personally, but I've heard it enough where, I don't think these people are making this up. That's just my guess anyway.
Yeah. It's a great story about your brother too. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah, sure.
All right. So what big question do you want to solve next on your podcast? What is something that you're like, I want to get down to the root of this?
To find more people that have past life memories of ancient civilizations. What would be really interesting is to even corroborate some of the stories that we see in the Bible. My guess is that even some of the more outrageous things, like about the giants, could have actually happened. And I'm not talking about 2,000 years ago. I'm talking about more like 20, 40, 50,000 years ago. And people that have memories that go way, way back, that would be interesting.
So you have to talk to a lot of past life regression people then? A lot of experiencers or?
Experiencers. Yeah. Because many of them have had, they've had more than one, obviously. Right. And the ones they remember are the ones that are relevant to the lives that they're in now.
Okay. So this is a shout out to all of those experiencers out there that can give us from 20 to 50,000 years ago, right? Is that
or more than that? Hopefully,
or more than that.
Yeah, because some of the experiences do go back, like even before recorded time. Who knows when that is?
Yeah. I don't. Okay, cool. Well, anybody out there who has that experience, you find Johnny on the Closer to Venus podcast. I want to just say thank you. I really appreciate your openness. I love listening to your podcast. I learn from you and your guests. And I like the what if, and I like the fact that you're bringing this kind of evidence to light, people's experiences. So I thank you for being on my podcast. Well, I appreciate it.
Thank you for being open to this and having me on your podcast. I think these kind of conversations are really important.
Yeah, you have a lot of
you have to have a sense of humor, though, right?
You do. You do have to have a sense of humor.
You can't be afraid to laugh at something because some of this stuff can get pretty heavy.
Well, I figured with 250 episodes in, that you might see some themes and you might have some opinions in terms of the information you've gathered. So I appreciate you sharing that with us today. All right. And thank you.
Right.
Bye, everybody, from Ellen and Johnny. Thanks for listening to the Live Your Jam podcast. If today's episode sparked insight or inspiration, follow that thread. That's your inner wisdom speaking. Share this episode with a friend who'd vibe with it, and if you're moved to, leave a review so others can find their way here too. Remember, the dreams that stir within you aren't frivolous, they're instructions from your soul. You can listen on Spotify and Apple Podcast, or watch the video version on YouTube to see me and my amazing guests in action. Until next time, keep listening in and keep living your jam.